So it's an information session and we hope you get the most out of it. I'll begin by taking you through the key principles of the monitoring and what we're seeking to achieve. Then I'm going to hand over to Sam in my team, who's going to talk you through site visits, annual declaration, how we're learning, because we're seeking to learn as well what works in our monitoring approach. We're going to talk you through learning participation monitoring, and then, as Liz outlined, we're going to break for a question and answer session. So please don't worry about putting your questions in. We are going to have a short break, as Liz outlined, after the learning participation monitoring, and that will give you the opportunity to submit a question if you have one on the back of the information that we've given you this evening. So if we go to the next slide, please. And the next one. Thanks, Liz. So, principles of monitoring. So I think it's useful just to remind ourselves that the pilot is a space for us to learn and improve. It's going to test a new model for monitoring and the delivery of agreements. And as we've published on our blog, we want to reset the relationship. And we know that one of the key things we can do that is by a new approach to monitoring of agreements. And we want to focus on the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve, an improvement, rather than instead on penalties, so while still protecting public money. So we hope that we are testing an approach in the pilot to see how that works, if that works, and we need your feedback about whether it works. So it's all about learning, and it will help us build a monitoring system that helps to reset that relationship in the new Sustainable Farm Incentive rollout. So your feedback, if you're involved in either a site visit or everybody will be required to do an annual declaration, as we'll see, it will help us make improvements and develop a simple and effective monitoring approach. So we will monitor your agreement using a site visit, and Sam is going to take you through that in a little bit more detail. If you're not able to achieve the aims of the standards, we're going to work with you to explore why that is. And that's why it's really important that you use things like your learning journal to note down how you're getting on with implementing your standards, what's working, what you've done, what's working, and what's not working so well, so that we can track that back and understand. But it also helps us understand whether there may be a gap in the guidance or there's a lack of clarity around the standard and it needs to be amended. So this piece of work that we're doing, looking at our new monitoring approach and testing it to understand whether it works, it is fundamental and will fundamentally support the delivery of our new schemes. So I hope that outlines the principles of what we're trying to achieve. If we go into the next slide, please, Liz. So I'd like to hand over to Sam at this point, who is going to take you through the rest of the presentation. Sam.
Thanks, Louise, and evening to everybody. So as Louise said, I'm going to just take you through sort of our process for the site visits. So site visits themselves are nothing particularly new, and I'm sure lots of you have had experience of those in the past. But as Louise said, we're looking to reset this process and follow a different sort of trajectory for them going forward in our new schemes, and we're starting that in the pilot and seeing how that goes. So it's going to be a new process. We're going to learn from each visit and review that process as well. So, we want to learn and see how the actual process runs, as well as what we're, the information that we're obtaining from that. And we will be looking to see if we need to make any changes on the process. The actual site visit, the physical visit itself, will probably feel quite similar to site visits from other schemes like countryside stewardship. But as you can see below, we've got a slightly different process that goes on, as we progress through how it would work. Just a couple of notes that this will be for your main sustainable farming incentive pilot agreement only, so it doesn't apply to the any capital agreements you have. They will follow a separate process which is detailed in the capital agreement itself, and again is very similar to the standalone countryside stewardship capital grant. So and the site visit itself will be looking at the main agreement and not looking at the capital agreement at the same time. So it is focused on the actual agreements, the standards. So there are at application there were various eligibility checks undertaken, as you know, and you've all gone through that process with us with your application forms. We've got a site visit, an assessment report, which I'll detail in a little bit more detail shortly, and then a panel review, which again I'll give you some more detail on as well. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Liz. So just to give you a bit of an overview, and Pete, this might help answer one of the very first question that's in the Q&A. The site visits are going to begin shortly for an initial sample of participants. So as this is a learning process, you know, we're going to take an initial sample, see how that runs for our pilot farmers, see how it runs for ourselves, and over the course of the first year, we're estimating, we're planning for around 120 site visits. So out of all of our pilot farmers, we're looking to do around 120 in the first year. So that will mean for lots of you, you know, here tonight and on the pilot, that you won't be subject to a site visit in the first year, and that's obviously nothing to worry about. We're just looking, you know, at how they operate, how long they take, how it works. Do we need to do more? Do we need to do less? But that's our current plans. They're going to be undertaken by RPA field officers, so members of the RPA that are well versed with how to undertake and how to go out on farm. And if you are selected for a site visit, you'll be given 72 hours notice even of a visit. And there will be the usual process that obviously if it's not convenient in that time, for you to give us a time that is convenient, I think within the next 14 days, but the standard process will be a 72 hours. And our plan with these is to undertake these visits before the end of the third quarter of your agreement. So because again, this is a new scheme and a new way of running things, and we're paying sort of in quarterly in arrears sections, and we're looking at that, you know, we're aiming to undertake these visits before the end of your third quarter. Site visits themselves, I'm going to go in a bit more detail, but they're looking at eligibility, so rechecking the eligibility, the delivery of the standards, and are providing, you know, that really important learning for us on the guidance and the standards themselves. As we said in previous sessions, it is a new process, and sort of in the next stage, you know, there won't be any penalties. We don't have a penalties element within these new schemes, but there could potentially be negotiations over delivery of the standard if that's what comes out from the site visits, and the latter stages of that is where it's quite a different approach to how we've run previous schemes and certainly the Common Agricultural Policy schemes in the past. So Liz, if we could move on to the next one. So we've got some key principles of the assessment. So we're going to be looking at eligibility, so that's land parcels that are entered into the agreement, the existence of them, and the land covers that are on them, the delivery of the standards, so the actions that are detailed within the standards, and some of the prompts within the guidance to look to see if they're undertaken and that they're present there within the land parcels that have been entered into the agreements, and then obviously any sort of documents and plans that have been required, so for example soil assessments or keeping evidence that you've undertaken things, looking at those. So that's the areas that the site visit will cover. There's some more key points that are worth sort of understanding, that the site visit is an assessment of the agreement and where you are with the implementation of the standards at a single point in time. So if we're coming out to see you in July or August or September, we'll be looking at the expectation of what of your agreement should have been delivered within that time. So if there are actions or activities that you need to do, for example, establishing winter cover that aren't needed at that particular time, then we won't be looking at that. We'll only be looking at the things that could or should have been done in that time. And certainly in the first year, we know that with lots of you have had your agreement starting at different times of the year, there are going to be you're going to be at various stages of planning and implementation. So we're quite aware of that, but we're not, there won't be any sort of expectation of what you might do in the future as you continue through the course of your agreement. The field officer will be there to assess, but will also be there to discuss with you. To look at any issues that might be arising, or to confirm how things have been delivered, and also to discuss where there's any possible remedies to things. Looking at areas of delivery or where you may have come across problems. So the officer will be there to discuss those with you, as opposed to just taking an assessment. And after the site visit, the officer will produce a full report, and they'll of the visit, how it's gone, what's come up, what the discussions that have taken place, and any sort of actions that can be rectifiable, and then that report will be shared with you, so you'll have a copy of that report. Liz, if we can move on to the next one, just a bit more on the report. So I think there's sort of three main areas of the report. So it will look at, are there any issues? So are there any issues at all? And just sort of summarize those. Looking at eligibility. So, if once looked on site, if a farmer's not perhaps in managerial control of the land, so they haven't been able to deliver the standards because they don't have the sufficient managerial control, or if the land is not as we have it recorded in the agreement, so if it's say less than that held in the agreement, or more than that held in the agreement as declared. So it will be looking at those sorts of issues, and then also issues relating to the delivery of the standards themselves. So looking to see if an activity or a planning activity has not been undertaken, or has been done, has been confirmed, or maybe if it's been undertaken but maybe not to the specifications required within the particular actions or the standard within the agreement. So for example, it could be all the buffer strips are there, but there's not sufficient length of them or the widths required. So looking at those types of things, or if you've not maintained any sort of records, for example, the soil assessment or the management plans that you were required to do. So with the site visit, as well as passing a copy going to you, a copy of that report will also then be sent on to our assessment panel. And as if we can move on to the next slide, this sort of gives you a bit more detail of the panel, and this is our particular sort of new concept that we're testing in the pilot. So we've put together this panel. They will then look at these reports and consider all the issues that are arising from site visits and that are highlighted in the report. The panel itself is going to be made up of a number of people, people from DEFRA, from the Rural Payments Agency, and also our partner organisations that have been helping us to build these schemes with yourselves. So that's Natural England, Historic England, Forestry Commission, Environment Agency, together to consider things that have arisen and things that have come out within the report. And what it will be looking at is, are there any changes to the policy or the guidance that we've furnished you with, and wider points of learning? So is there, for example, is there a consistent problem that we're seeing every time that a particular standard or an action is assessed? Is it the same problem? Is it something that we've done or not done? Or is there something that we can do, other common things that we need to learn from? Or in another way, is it an isolated thing, and the majority of farmers that we've gone out and seen and looked at what they've been doing, they've all not had too much of a problem in delivering the standards, but there have been a couple of cases, and then it's understanding why those have had difficulty as opposed to the majority. So it's looking at all of those ways, and certainly key from our point of view is looking to see where we need to update our policy or our guidance, and also how that can help as we develop the wider sustainable farming incentive and our other environmental land management policies. The panel will do that assessment, look at those things, but then they'll also suggest any adjustments that might be required to individual agreements of our farmers, so your agreements. So for example, that could be suggesting that a reduction in ambition, level of ambition within a standard is probably the best remedy, or in some sort of extreme cases, a recovery or removal of that standard. But it will be a suggestion, and then after sort of full discussion and analysis, and then agreement holders will be notified of sort of the outcomes of the panel decision. So that's how we're looking to run those this sort of site, the site visit, and how it will work and what will happen sort of before and after. So we thought it would be useful to you all to have a sort of a how to prepare checklist to make sure that it's if you do have a site visit, how they run to run smoothly and easier for you. So obviously the first thing to do would be to check that you've completed the actions within the different standards you have in your agreements that you're able to. So as I said earlier, it really is a point in time, and we're not expecting you to complete actions that you haven't you don't need to, or that you haven't had a chance to at this stage because of when your agreement started. As Louise said earlier, check your learning journal and your land management plan is up to date, because obviously that could provide useful evidence in explaining where you've got to in the delivery of your standards, or why you've got to that point and how that's done. And our RPA officers will want to look at those and see those, and you can use them obviously to highlight things. And then also think about gathering evidence together for the standards. So if it asks for the soil management plan or your soil testing results, things like that, to have them together, and any other evidence like invoices or pictures, if you've taken some pictures of sort of pre and post to show, or if you're looking at the development of areas, if you've taken pictures to map and record that, then have them to hand. After the site visit, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about this in a minute, we will be running some learning sessions. So we will contact you to sort of look at the what we can learn from you, as well as the actual session itself. At the site visit, or during the visit, that won't be a point to amend your agreement or an opportunity to amend your agreement. There will be a separate process for that, and we've talked in the past about our sort of amendment window, and a chance to amend your agreement and change some of the perhaps the standards or the land or the levels of ambition. We'll run a separate session on that and explain that in a bit more detail for you, but that won't form part of that. Won't sort of start the site visit. Won't start that process, or you won't have an opportunity to sort of agree, well, I'll do this and I'll add this in or change that around. That won't be sort of part of it. So those are the sort of key points in terms of how to get ready. I just wanted to move on to the annual declaration, because we wanted to along with the start of the site visits, we are approaching the time for annual declarations as well, and there are some subtle differences. So as we mentioned with the site visits, we're looking to run about 120 of those throughout the first year of the pilot, but the annual declaration will be required from every pilot participant, and it's like an online legal confirmation that you've complied with the obligations under your agreement. So as we've said in past and in some of our sort of introductory sessions, the pilot is a slightly different approach to previous schemes where you claim to things. This is an undertaking through a declaration. So we have an annual undertaking request. It will be through the Rural Payment Service. So you'll log in and do it through the Rural Payment Service, and it's a tick box and submit process to say, yes, I've done this, and or no, I haven't, and and then you submit, and you will be able to complete your annual declaration from the 10th month of your agreement in the first year, and then on a 12-monthly basis going forward, and that will coincide with your amendment window as well. You will get a reminder, so you won't have to sort of remember or diarise it or set a diary reminder. You'll get a reminder a couple of weeks before it needs to be completed, and we've worked on making it as simple as we possibly can, with a view that it should take 5 to 10 minutes to log on and complete the declaration. And from a declaration perspective, there won't be any additional evidence at that point that you'll need to put in. So we thought it was worth just noting that at this point, and noting that's different to the site visits, and that is something for everybody that everybody in the pilot will need to submit. So moving on to how we'll learn, and as Louise pointed out, the site visit itself is a chance for us to understand how the standards have been going, how you've been implementing them, the things that you've come up against, what's gone well, what's not gone so well. But we also want to learn about the visits as well. We want to learn, are these visits working? Are they not working? How's it made you feel being in those, undertaking these types of visits? Because that's a really important part. So after you've had your visit, we will also contact you to take part in our site visit study, and that will come via the DEFRA learning team. So all of you, lots of you hopefully are aware of all of us from the DEFRA side and the learning team, and we've been running the various deep dives and workshops and our webinar series and our drop-in sessions. So you'll be contacted by one of our team, and we'll also be looking at other ways of monitoring. So things like desk-based reviews, telephone calls, virtual site visits, remote sensing. So these are all the other things that we're looking at the moment. But the site visits are initially going to be our first sort of way of monitoring and see how things are going. So if we can move on to the next slide. So once you've had a site visit, and then if we contact you about the site visit studies, these are the sorts of things that we'll be asking, the sorts of questions that we're looking to sort of find out, is the process clear? So I seem to think it's really nice and clear that I've gone through my slides, but actually in practice, is that clear for you? Did it make sense? Did you get to discuss everything that you wanted to discuss, with the site visit officer? Was it enough time? Did we allow enough time to sort of go around and look at the various standards for you? Was it the right time of year? So there are lots of things that we want to ask to find out, what's your view about, improvements that we could make for visits or the annual declaration if you completed your declaration. And it's really looking about, is this actually working? Does it make a better relationship between us? If there were sort of discussions that were quite complex, did you feel that we tackled those correctly and gave you the answers? So quite wide ranging, but hopefully it gives you an idea that we really are looking, we're piloting the scheme, and so we're piloting the standards and the actions within the standards and the concept of that and how that works, but we're also piloting how we can reset this approach and work with you to look to see if we can maximize delivery of environmental activities within farming and food production. So this is a really important work, and you being a sort of head of the game, being in the pilot, before we roll out the full scheme later this year, it's really important that we get some of this early learning back in from you in a similar way that we have with the application process and some of the initial sort of thoughts on the standard. And as we've said in previous sessions and in our blog and things, we've made quite a lot of changes to the main sustainable farming incentive scheme already, even before it's launched, from the feedback that we've had from you, and the operation of the scheme with you. So this is sort of a continuation of that, that type of work. And then if we can move on to the next slide, Liz. So there's just one other thing that we wanted to run with you this evening as well, is that our learning, just again to make make it clear that our sort of learning participation, so the pilot learning, so all the deep dives that we're doing, the workshops, the surveys, the face-to-face events, our drop-in sessions, again, they're not going to be looked at, and they won't form part of the site visits, the annual declaration, but they do sort of, they're one of the activities that we're doing. The post-site visit study is one of those activities. So these will continue to be monitored separately. So your agreement requires you to spend up to 15 hours a month on pilot learning through completing your journey journal, thinking about the standards, implementing them, and your land management plan. So we'll be, as we have been doing, as we talked to you in our learning webinar series earlier this year, this is a separate sort of exercise, and it's another thing that we're doing. So we are looking at those, and if we sort of notice that there are any sort of issues or problems that you're having, then we'll contact you. And if you've got any problems we've had contact with from people already, and where we've been able to sort of talk to them and clarify things, then do get in contact with us if you're sort of concerned about that. But we just really wanted to make the point that it's a slightly different sort of element to the site visits and the annual declaration, but that will continue as we have in the past. So I think that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, Louise, that I've taken everybody through. Hopefully it's clear. I can see that there's some questions coming in the Q&A, but I think before we go on to the Q&A, and then we can have a bit more of an answering session with those, we're going to take a quick break to give everybody a chance to reset and to put your questions in. So thank you. So I'll hand back to you, Louise, quickly before we finish, and then we'll have a 5-minute break if that's okay.
Thanks, Sam. So as Sam said, we're just going to have a quick 5 minutes break. Thank you for submitting your questions already. If you can just see the Q&A button, it should be at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a laptop, it might be on the side of your screen if you're on your mobile phone. If you click on that, you will be able to answer a question if you've got one. You will see there's a tab as well where you can see there's some open and there's some already answered as well. So please check the ones that's answered, because the team have been busily away in the background answering some of them. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll return in 5 minutes and we'll to answer some of your questions. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye. We'll just knock our screens off and we'll come back at 25 to 8. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Liz, for restarting the recording. Hello, welcome back, everybody. I hope the 5 minutes was helpful just for you to scan the questions and those that have already been asked. So what I'm going to do now is ask some of these questions and go over the panel to help you answer them. So the first question I've got is from Michael, and it's about how much time the agreement holder will need to give the field officer on the site visit. So I think this very much depends on the size of your agreement that you have and how many standards that you have in your agreement. So it could take longer if you do have more standards. Jenny, Matt, have you got anything to add to that?
Hi, Louise. No, I mean that's it really. It does depend on the amount of parcels and the standards, the range of the standards that are in the agreement as well. I think one of the benefits of using the existing sort of field officers within the RPA, when notified, they may be able to at least give you an estimate based on their experience and working with CS domestic inspections and things like that. But it does obviously depend on the size of the agreement.
Thanks, Matt. That's really helpful. So just looking to some of the questions that's been answered, particularly on monitoring, just in case some of you on the call haven't seen those. So Pete asked a question about how many will there be. So Sam covered that in the presentation. So in the first year, there will be 120 site visits, and we pick that sample as random, as Jenny has already answered. Just looking through some of the other questions that we've got. We've got a question here about planning visits at a busy time of year when harvesting, silaging, sheep sales, holiday, topping, etc. What if we can't visit the site visits when contacted? I think if you are busy on farm and you are contacted to say that you are going to have a site visit, I think the thing is to let us know as quickly as they possibly can and the reason why you can't do that. And the date and time will be rearranged if you have a business reason. Matt, Jenny, is that correct?
Yes, that's right. And I think, as Matt said earlier as well, the fact that we're using experienced field officers, they will, enter into those discussions with you about what's reasonable timescale and what have you. And there are opportunities to rearrange within, an appropriate window to do so. So we do recognise that it's a busy time of year. I think as well, there's that element that those field officers are experienced at being out on site. So there may be, parts of that site visit that they can manage themselves, and what have you, that doesn't necessarily need to draw on too much time.
Louise, I was just going to come in as well, just to say as well with the site visits that, as we mentioned in the presentation earlier, that they're going to start shortly, but that we're looking to do them throughout the whole sort of first period. So although we're starting them as we come up towards sort of current harvest and in the middle of sort of hay and silage making, these 120 are not all going to be done in the next couple of months. It's going to be over the next sort of 12 months, and will align a little bit more with when you're where you are in your sort of pilot agreement and pilot year. So it won't be everybody that that's contacted sort of in the summer, but we know that there are lots of different sort of farming calendars operating within the farming different farming businesses, and lambing times and calving times, and then short daylight hours. So we are really open. We understand that that is not always convenient for people.
Thanks very much, Sam. We've got a question here from Martin about the 15 hours of learning activity for the learning participation payment. And what I would say, what counts towards the 15 hours. So there's a variety of different things, different learning activities. So you're doing your journal counts towards some of that. Your land management plan will count towards some of that. There's some activities that we will be doing, so be led by DEFRA and the Rural Payments Agency, but there's other activities that are led by our partners that also count towards your learning participation, and that might be ICF, who you may have been contacted by, or the University of Sheffield. So there's lots that count towards it. So it is the things as well that ICF and the University of Sheffield are doing along with us. Sam, was there any other questions you could see that we can answer?
Just come off mute. I noticed that we had one about, there's a couple about expectations for the learning journal and the land management plan, and I know I mentioned that's potentially a source of evidence that you can use when discussing your agreements on a site visit. So we have got some we've got some quite good guides. We did run some earlier sessions, which appreciate you may not have been able to have attended or even had a live agreement at the time, but we've got some guides and some information about the land management plan and our journals that are on the SharePoint site that you all have access to. If you've not managed to get access to those, drop us a line at our standard SFI pilot learning email address, and we can sort that. But in terms of what was expected for the learning journal and the land management plan, it really is up to you. And again, I know we say this frequently, but it's for us also to find out what you are putting in your journal and your land management plans, and how that's working. And I know that some people may put minimal stuff, or if there's somebody like me, might put lots of stuff in there. But it's really about learning for you to sort of keep a record of how it's gone, what sort of crossroads you've come up against, or decisions you've made, or if you've decided to put something in a particular area, or carry out an action in a particular way, to note that in there, really, so that when we come to look at them, or when the site officer looks at them, or you're using it to explain, that you can refer back to what you did maybe a couple of months beforehand, just to sort of refresh your memory, or to say, I definitely thought about that, and this is why, this was the rationale. So really it's up to you. And as I say, some people might want to put lots in, some people might want to just put some key points that helps them. So we haven't sort of set a minimum amount or a maximum amount that you can put in there, but we've got some guidance that's hopefully quite useful for that.
Can I pick up a question, please, Louise?
Yes,
there's a question from Brian and Liz about the opportunity in the annual declaration to explain why things haven't quite been achieved and how that works. So the annual so the mixture between the amendment window and you making your amendment on your second year of the agreement, and the annual declaration, which is about making a positive declaration about achieving your actions for this year. So, as I said, the annual declaration is about making a positive declaration. We understand that the positive declaration is that you've worked towards. So things like your example that you've said about weather issues and what have you, that wouldn't be a reason to not make the declaration positively. But there is a route through the annual declaration form, which is a query route, which comes through to us. If you believe that you're not sure if you can make a positive declaration, you can send us that query and we can resolve that with yourself so that you're then able to go ahead and make that positive declaration.
Thanks, Jenny. That's really helpful. So we've got some questions just related to what we've just said around the Learning Journal, and I just wanted to know that Learning Journals won't be published. The purpose of the Learning Journal is for you to note down what you've learned, how it's gone with implementing the standards, how it's going with the site visits, what your experience was of the pilot, so you can share it with us when you come to some of our learning activities. So it is really just a record for you to share with us so that we can gather your learning. So I hope that that'll lay some fears that they won't be published. For learning participation payment, we did have a question about whether hours are going to be logged already for people that have taken part in. Yes, we are actively already logging your attendance. If you've come along to a webinar or if you've come along to one of our workshops, we'll have that all logged. So please don't worry. It's something that we've been running now since the start of the pilot. So we have been logging your attendance and things. So don't think that's that's gone amiss. We've got another question around our monitoring approach and what happens. I think people appreciate that it's good that it's going to be a discussion with the field officer, but some people are still a little bit worried if they've done something by accident. And what I would say is our approach to monitoring isn't to penalise people that have done something by accident or have done some interpreted the standard the guidance that we have around the standards in a way that wasn't intended. So please don't worry. That's the site visit will be that conversation that you have. The pilot is about learning, and we're here to gather what works and what doesn't work. So your field officer will have that conversation about how you've gone about implementing the standard, what you've done, and how you've done it to give us a clear picture of what's worked and what hasn't. Sam, have you got anything to add to that one?
Thanks, Louise. No, I think to reinforce that, there are a couple of other questions sort of around sort of learning journals, which I think it's quite good that it's regenerated some of the questions. But I think Glenn had put in a question about where to record some of that information, and if you're recording that in a sort of digital format, then that's absolutely fine. And again, that's part of what we want to find out is are farmers recording it in digital formats? Are they recording it in a diary, on the farm desk? What sort of format? So there's no specific requirements around that. So I think that's fine. And we have had a couple of questions about rules for repayment, and I think Louise and Jenny Matt come in, but I think again this is all part of our learning. I think at this stage we haven't made hard and fast rules and decisions, because we've got to see what comes up, what comes out of the visits, what does that look like, how is that, is it because of the scheme guidance, is it because of difficulties in application? So we're not at that stage yet to be able to say that, because that's we haven't pre-made all of these rules, because as you'll know, and as you've been working with us, this is a sort of a work in progress. So hopefully that's a form of reassurance that certainly didn't want it to sort of sound like the tone that we have this all set and ready. We've got a process to gather this information and see what's coming in, and if indeed you are having issues, but we're not predetermining any of that at this stage. I think we're getting through them, Louise. There are variations on similar ones. There is a bit. There's been a couple on the panel as well. So we obviously gave you some details about the panel that we're putting together. And as I mentioned in the presentation, the panel is made up of sort of DEFRA and RPA and our sort of partner organisations. And I think at this stage, you know, these are the people that you know, all the sort of different sort of parties that have been working together to put together the scheme, take the information from you know, people like yourselves in the pilot, people in our practitioner working groups, and then pulling that all together to the scheme. So that's why the panel has started in its current form. But again, you know, one of the things we want to see is that, you know, does that panel need to evolve? Does it need, you know, can it be smaller? Does it need to be larger? Does it need different types of people in? And we'll be looking at that, you know, as part of the process. You know, these will be, you know, as you have all been pioneering in the pilot, you know, this is the first time we've run a scheme that we've designed in this way and outside of the Common Agricultural Policy. And you know, that will be the same. You know, this is, you know, another part of that and something that we'll look to see how it works.
Thanks, Sam. We've also got a question that you may just have covered about whether farmers can participate on the panel, which is a good suggestion that we'd never thought of before, so we'll take that one away. There are quite a lot of questions actually around the learning journal and land management plans. So rather than take them here, I think it might be worth us running another session in the very near future, just going through the learning journal and land management plans, because I can see we're getting a few questions, and I think it would be a useful reminder. I've been out at a farm visit today and I got lots of questions so on that subject as well, so I think that would be good. We did have a question that's already been answered, but I think it's useful to voice this one over, about the timing of inspections and what if you haven't had the opportunity to, there's nothing to see because you haven't implemented your standard, and that's absolutely fine. The inspector won't be checking anything to see anything if that hasn't been implemented, so we'll be taking seasonality and where you are in your agreement will be taken into account. And we won't be looking at the delivery of actions which are not carried out by on the date of your visit. So don't worry on that front. Sam, can you see any others that would be helpful for us to voice over, or any that we haven't answered? Sam, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, chatting away to myself again, but I don't think there's anything that sort of new that we haven't sort of covered in one sort of form or another. I think there are a couple of sort of some interesting, some useful feedback about face-to-face meetings. I do actually have a plug before we finish as well, Louise, for everybody here tonight. But I think. Yeah, I don't think there's anything different now. I think we've seemed to have covered most of the points.
Yeah, I'm just having a quick scan, making sure that nobody's put any last minute questions, but I think we have covered most of those. Yeah, and we've got some really useful feedback to take away. So thank you very much for that. Sam, I think you said you had a plug.
I did have a plug, yes. So I have a plug. We've been, hopefully lots of you are aware that we've been running some drop-in sessions over the last month for various different aspects of the pilot. And some of the questions and points that have come up the evening have given Liz and I some ideas for future sessions. But we are going to be running some more of those sessions, and particularly on-site visits and the process of learning from those. They're going to be coming up next month. So we are going to send out a notification about those. So they're not live to sign up yet, but there'll be a similar format to the ones that we've been running over the last month. So quite small, relatively informal, but to be able to have a discussion about this a bit more for anybody that wants to join us. So it was just a plug just to keep an eye out for those. They should be coming up shortly. Thanks, Louise.
Thanks, Sam. And is it fair to that anybody, I know that we've got some volunteers here for on-farm visits. We had one today in Cumbria, and we are really keen to do some more if you find them useful. So if you are willing to host a farm visit and would like others to come into your farm so we can have some discussions about how the pilot is going, please do let us know.
Yeah. Louise, there have been a couple of other things that have come in. So there is just one since we sort of finished. There was one about will we be sending out a checklist for the site visit? So I don't think at the moment that we have any particular plans to send out a checklist ahead of a site visit. But what we will be doing is making these slides available on the SharePoint site, so you can always refer back to the checklist that we've put in there, if that helps. If you do happen to be selected for a visit. And we also had a question about does the pilot go on after year one, and it most certainly does. That your agreements are 3-year agreements, so you know, from a pilot perspective, that they're definitely there for the 3 years.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Sam. If we go on to the final slide, please, Liz, I don't want to miss anything. I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming along this evening, spending your time. I hope we've answered your question. We'll take the feedback back on the checklist that you'd find it useful, and definitely look to incorporate that into our process if we can in terms of the monitoring. But thank you for attending. We really appreciate it. When we press close this evening, please could you complete a quick survey, because it helps us improve the webinars and what we are doing so that they're useful for you and at a time that suits you. So please do take the time. If you've got any additional feedback, please, you can email us, so please do. There's our email address is on screen, and also encourage you to sign up to the blog as well, the DEFRA Farming blog. There's lots of articles from the pilot and what we're learning from the pilot and the rollout of the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme later this year. So please do have a look at that. It's a really informative blog. But thank you for your time this evening. We'll close the meeting there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.